Think about the basic visual logic of cooking for a second. If you take a pot of marinara sauce and, boil it down on the stove, it gets darker red.
Right, it just condenses. The color gets deeper.
Exactly. The visual evidence follows a totally predictable path, but dairy fundamentally breaks that logic.
It really does. It's like almost like a culinary parlor trick.
Right. If you take a vat of pure, bright white liquid cream and you just agitate it, no heat applied, no food coloring dropped in, no chemicals, you'd logically expect the end result to just still be white.
I mean, on the surface, the visual math simply does not add up.
It makes no sense. But instead, after enough churning, that white liquid magically transforms into a solid brick of bright yellow butter. And that bizarre transformation is exactly what we're unpacking today in this deep dive.
Yeah, we are finally solving the white milk, yellow butter paradox.
We really are. Our mission today is to take you from the microscopic biology of a cow's digestive system through all the geographical differences and how the world feeds its livestock, straight into a completely unhinged chapter of 19th century food counterfeiting.
Which is such a wild story.
It's crazy. And by the time we finish this deep dive, you will look at the butter melting on your morning toast with a completely new level of respect. We're pulling from some great sources today, too, including insights from food scientist Brian Quackley, author of 150 Food Science Questions Answered.
Yeah, as well as some fascinating historical data from historic Sugartown and research from the Center for Dairy Research at the University of Wisconsin.
So to start us off, how does this actually happen?
Well, the answer to the paradox requires stripping away everything we think we know about dairy.
Yeah.
We have to look at the raw chemistry of animal agriculture.
Right. Because the journey to that yellow stick of butter actually begins long before the milk ever leaves the farm, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It starts in the soil. It starts with the grass.
Because the cow itself isn't generating that yellow pigment internally. The secret is entirely the cow's diet.
Yeah, fresh pasture grass is loaded with a very specific, naturally occurring chemical compound called beta-carotene.
Beta-carotene, which makes perfect sense because that's the exact same pigment complex responsible for packing those incredibly vibrant, earthy orange hues into things like carrots, sweet potatoes, and pumpkins.
Right. The plant kingdom uses carotenoids extensively. Now, a grazing field obviously looks green to the human eye, not orange.
Right, I was going to say, grass is definitely green.
It is. The beta-carotene in a blade of grass is completely masked by the overwhelming presence of green chlorophyll. And, it exists in a much lower concentration than it does in a carrot.
But the cow grazes on massive quantities of this grass all day long.
Exactly. And as the cow digests the grass, it absorbs those carotenoids into its system.
Which naturally leads to the obvious question for you, the listener. If the cow absorbs the orange-yellow beta-carotene and those compounds make their way into the milk, why does the milk pour out of the jug looking stark white?
To understand the camouflage, we have to look at the molecular structure of the compounds involved. Beta-carotene is what chemists call a lipophilic, or fat-soluble, molecule.
Meaning it loves fat and hates water.
Exactly. Physically, it's a long hydrocarbon chain that is completely nonpolar. It absolutely repels water, but it binds beautifully to lipids, or fats.
And fluid milk straight from the cow is essentially an emulsion, right? It's overwhelmingly made up of water with just a tiny percentage of fat suspended in it.
Yeah, we're talking roughly 3% fat in whole milk.
Just 3%. And that tiny amount is crucial. Inside the milk, that fat exists as microscopic, distinct little globules.
And the cow's biology wraps every single one of those tiny fat droplets in a protective phospholipid membrane. This membrane prevents the fat from clumping together prematurely while it's still inside the udder.
Oh, wow. So it's basically a bunch of tiny little water balloons filled with fat.
That's a great way to picture it. And because beta-carotene is fat-soluble, every single molecule of that yellow pigment gets trapped inside those microscopic, membrane-bound fat droplets.
So the pigment is sequestered. It's locked in a microscopic vault, just floating in a massive sea of water and milk proteins.
All right. And because the fat droplets are so incredibly small and disperse so thinly throughout the fluid, the human eye just cannot perceive the yellow tint.
The surrounding white proteins and the water completely wash out the pigment. You literally can't see it.
Exactly. We need physical violence to break open those vaults, which is precisely what the churning process is.
Just smashing them open.
Yeah. When you pour cream into a churn and begin to agitate it aggressively, you are systematically smashing those microscopic fat globules into each other. The mechanical force completely shatters that protective phospholipid membrane.
Okay, let's unpack this with a kitchen analogy. Think about making a really rich demi-glace.
Oh, I love a good demi-glace.
Right. You start with a massive gallon-sized pot of very thin, pale beef broth. It looks almost clear, but you leave it simmering on the stove for 8 hours, evaporating and boiling off all the water.
And eventually, you are left with a tiny amount of incredibly thick, dark, deeply colored syrup at the bottom of the pan.
Exactly. The ingredients didn't change at all. You simply removed the diluting agent and drastically increased the density.
And that broth reduction is the exact mechanical equivalent of churning butter, just using kinetic energy instead of heat.
Because as the fat membranes shatter during churning, the naked fat molecules start to stick to one another.
Right, they clump together and they separate from the liquid water. That liquid, which is the buttermilk, is drained away.
So you are taking a liquid emulsion that was maybe 3% fat, discarding the water, and condensing the remaining lipids into a solid block that is roughly 80 to 85% pure fat.
And Brian Kwatalik actually quantified this in his book. He calculated that the churning process increases the concentration of beta-carotene to a level roughly 28 times higher than what it was in the fluid milk.
28 times? That's insane.
It is. You've totally removed the camouflage. Those microscopic yellow compounds are no longer dispersed. They are packed incredibly densely into a solid fat matrix.
Reaching a critical visual mass, so the pigment is finally revealed to the eye. The white milk yields the yellow butter. It's not magic, it's just density.
Exactly. The logic is totally airtight. Grass delivers beta-carotene. Beta-carotene binds to the fat, and isolating the fat concentrates the color into a visible yellow.
And this is a big, but if you walk into any modern grocery store today, that logic hits a wall.
It really does.
Because a stick of standard generic butter produced in the United States is incredibly pale. It almost looks like an off-white wax. But if you pick up a block of imported grass-fed butter, like a Kerrygold from Ireland, it is a stunning, deep golden yellow.
The visual discrepancy is so jarring when you see them side by side.
It really is. Why is that?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the color variation is essentially a geographical receipt. It's documenting the broader agricultural practices of different nations.
Okay, so we established that grass equals yellow.
Right. And Irish cows, benefiting from a really mild, wet, maritime climate, are out grazing on lush, green pastures for the vast majority of the year. They are consuming an almost exclusively grass-based diet.
Which means their systems are flooded with maximum levels of beta-carotene.
Exactly. But the American dairy industry relies on a completely different metabolic strategy. U.S. cows are primarily fed a diet of forage, so basic grass and hay, but it's heavily supplemented with corn.
Corn. And if you think about a kernel of feed corn, that visual discrepancy makes perfect sense.
It totally does.
Crack open a kernel of corn and the inside is pale yellow or stark white. It completely lacks the vibrant, pigment-rich beta-carotene complex found in fresh grass.
Right, the American agricultural system really prizes efficiency and energy density above all else. Corn is an incredibly potent, energy-dense carbohydrate source.
It helps livestock bulk up rapidly and produce massive volumes of milk with really high caloric efficiency.
But the biological trade-off for that caloric efficiency is a drastic reduction in pigment. By substituting high-carotene grass with low-carotene corn, the American dairy industry is literally draining the color out of the resulting butterfat.
Wow. And according to the historical and agricultural data we reviewed, this color shift isn't just geographical either, it is strictly seasonal.
Oh, absolutely. A single farm producing butter year-round will yield totally different colors depending on the month.
During the spring flush and the height of summer, when the pastures are growing vigorously and the cows are feeding outdoors, the butter takes on a rich golden hue.
But in the dead of winter, when the grass is dormant and the cows are brought inside to eat stored, dried hay or grain, the beta-carotene levels just plummet.
And the butter turns noticeably paler, which creates an interesting psychological dilemma for the modern consumer, right? Because human beings inherently eat with our eyes.
We do. We are deeply conditioned to associate certain colors with specific qualities.
So a consumer might unwrap a pale stick of winter butter and just assume it is defective or nutritionally inferior. Which brings me to a crucial question. Is there actually a culinary difference between the golden summer butter and the pale winter butter? Or is it purely cosmetic?
Well, from a strict food safety perspective, the pale butter is perfectly fine.
Okay, good to know.
But from a culinary flavor profile perspective, the color is a highly reliable indicator of depth. The fascinating thing about beta-carotene is that it doesn't travel alone.
What do you mean?
Well, when a cow grazes on diverse, fresh pasture, it isn't just absorbing pigment. It is absorbing a complex array of volatile flavor compounds from the various grasses and clovers.
And those flavor compounds are also fat-soluble.
Precisely. They ride shotgun with the beta-carotene straight into the fat cells.
That makes so much sense. So they accumulate in the exact same lipid matrix.
They do. Therefore, a deeper, more vibrant yellow actually serves as a visual guarantee that the butter is packing a higher density of those rich, complex, grassy flavor notes.
Now, if you are baking a heavily spiced carrot cake or melting the butter into a batch of dark chocolate brownies, you probably won't notice. The subtle flavor nuances will just be completely masked by the sugar and cocoa.
Right, you lose it in the mix.
But if you take a room temperature pat of that golden butter and let it melt into the nooks and crannies of a freshly toasted English muffin,
Oh, man.
or spread it over a warm, savory biscuit, the butter becomes the primary ingredient you are tasting. The depth of flavor is unmistakable.
It really is. The caveat here, as Brian Quackley points out, is that while color indicates flavor, we have to look for the right colors.
Right, there are wrong colors.
Very wrong. White, cream, and varied shades of yellow are the only natural, biologically acceptable colors for butterfat.
So if you unwrap a stick of butter
Right.
and you notice grayish patches or a dull brown tint,
Or irregular dark streaks marring the surface,
Right.
the butter has chemically failed.
those discolorations are visual markers of severe oxidation and spoilage. The fat molecules have literally fractured and gone rancid. Don't eat that.
Definitely do not eat that.
So humanity figures out this agricultural equation. We learn that a deep golden yellow equals a grass-fed diet, which equals premium flavor and higher culinary value.
Right?
And because human nature dictates that wherever there is perceived value, someone will inevitably try to counterfeit it, we arrive at one of the most bizarre chapters in food history.
Margarine wars.
Yes, the margarine wars. It is a phenomenal study in economic protectionism and just straight-up psychological manipulation.
It really is. Now, to clarify modern standards, first, actual dairy butter is heavily regulated today.
Right. If a manufacturer wants to ensure a consistent yellow color year-round, regardless of the season, they might use a natural additive called annatto extract.
Which is derived from the seeds of the accio tree. But food safety laws mandate that this addition must be explicitly declared on the ingredient label.
So they can't sneak it in. But the true historical drama wasn't about adulterating butter. It was about destroying its primary competitor.
Margarine, which was developed in the mid-19th century.
And originally it was formulated using beef tallow or heavily processed vegetable oils like cottonseed oil.
Yeah, and in its natural, unprocessed state, margarine is a highly unappetizing, stark white or dull gray paste.
Yuck. But the manufacturers of margarine were incredibly savvy. They knew consumers desired the rich, golden look of premium grass-fed dairy.
So they simply dyed their gray beef fat paste bright yellow to flawlessly mimic the appearance of high-quality butter.
Just completely faked it. Now put yourself in the position of the 19th century dairy farmer. You have spent generations perfecting the agricultural science of grazing cattle to produce a premium product.
And suddenly, industrial manufacturers flood the market with a synthetic imposter.
It looks identical to your best butter, it mimics the texture, but because it relies on cheap oils instead of animal husbandry, it is vastly cheaper to produce.
Furthermore, it possesses a much longer shelf life.
It was an absolute existential crisis for the dairy industry. They mobilized a massive political lobbying effort, arguing that yellow margarine was fundamentally deceptive to the public.
They took their panic to state legislatures and ultimately all the way to the United States Congress.
And the government, recognizing the vital economic importance of the dairy sector, stepped in with aggressive legislative force.
The federal government's approach was primarily economic. They imposed steep punitive taxes, specifically targeting margarine that had been dyed yellow.
Artificially raising the price to destroy its competitive advantage over real butter.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The individual states decided that economic penalties just weren't enough. They wanted to wage a psychological war on the product.
This is my favorite part of the research.
We looked at preserved legislative records from historic Sugartown, which is an authentic 19th century village in Pennsylvania. And several state legislatures actually passed laws mandating that if a manufacturer wanted to sell margarine, they were legally required to dye it.
But they couldn't dye it yellow.
No, they legally forced them to dye the margarine bright neon pink.
Pink. The legislative logic is brilliantly malicious.
It's so evil. By forcing the product to be pink, They entirely dismantled the visual deception. No consumer could possibly mistake a pink block of fat for natural dairy.
It creates massive cognitive dissonance.
I mean, imagine sitting in a diner in the 1890s. The waiter sets down a plate of hot toast in a little ramekin filled with a bright pink greasy paste.
Oh, it sounds awful.
Your brain associates that color with strawberries or sweet frosting or perhaps raw meat. Spreading savory, salty, pink fat onto bread completely short-circuits the human appetite.
It totally does. The dairy industry recognized that they could manipulate the consumer's visual expectations to render the competitors psychologically inedible.
It was an incredibly successful campaign of product humiliation.
And it wasn't until 1950 that Congress finally repealed the restrictive federal taxes on yellow margarine, closing the books on the era of legally mandated pink food substitutes.
1950, that's not even that long ago. The dairy industry fought ruthlessly to protect the integrity of that golden yellow color because that color represented the ultimate standard of quality fat.
But there is a profound biological irony hiding in that victory.
Which is what?
Well, the exact same structural chemistry that allows butter to hold that beautiful beta-carotene pigment also makes it uniquely vulnerable to a completely invisible, relentless enemy.
Oxygen.
Yes. The final battle for flavor doesn't happen in Congress.
Yeah.
It happens at the molecular level against oxygen. High-quality butterfat is fundamentally fragile.
Right, especially when you look at premium butter options, like cultured butter, where live bacterial cultures are introduced to ferment the cream and create a complex, tangy profile.
Or European-style butter, which is churned longer to achieve an exceptionally rich 82 or 83% fat content.
They rely purely on the integrity of their lipids for flavor, and lipids absolutely despise oxygen.
They do. The data provided by the Center for Dairy Research at the University of Wisconsin illustrates the physical chemistry of this vulnerability perfectly.
Because the fats in butter are composed of fatty acid chains, and when those chains are exposed to oxygen, a process called lipid oxidation begins.
And the oxygen molecules act like microscopic scissors. They literally steal electrons from the double bonds within the fat,
Cleaving the long lipid chains into smaller, highly volatile fragments called aldehydes and ketones.
Right. And our human olfactory system is incredibly sensitive to those specific chemical fragments.
So when those broken lipid chains hit our tongue, we perceive the taste as metallic, sour, or fundamentally rancid.
Which means the speed of the manufacturing process is a critical factor in flavor preservation.
Right, because in modern industrial dairy production, wrapping and packaging the butter is the penultimate step. It is the absolute last line of defense before the product is chilled and shipped.
And if a massive industrial manufacturer is churning gargantuan factory-scale batches of butter, the sheer logistics of moving that volume means it takes significantly longer to get all the butter shaped, wrapped in foil, and sealed.
Every additional minute that naked butter sits exposed to the ambient air on a factory production line, it is absorbing oxygen.
The molecular scissors are already going to work.
And then you combine that prolonged factory floor exposure with weeks or months sitting in massive cold storage warehouses before it even reaches the grocery store shelf.
It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
By the time you purchase a mass-produced stick of butter, it may have already lost its most delicate flavor notes.
It might taste remarkably bland or carry the very faint, early chemical signatures of that metallic tang.
This is exactly why butter from smaller artisanal producers often possesses a remarkably cleaner, more vibrant taste.
They are working with much smaller volumes.
Right. The time elapsed between the butter leaving the churn and being hermetically sealed in its packaging is drastically reduced. They're winning the race against ambient air exposure.
But the sources, specifically food scientist Brian Kwok-Lay, argue that this battle against oxidation actually continues right into your own home.
He does. Lay suggests that the way you handle a stick of butter physically degrades it over time.
His theory is that if you unwrap a stick, slice off a single tablespoon for a recipe, loosely fold the paper back over the end, and return it to the fridge, and repeat this process day after day, you are constantly introducing fresh oxygen to the exposed face of the butter.
And by the time you reach the final tablespoon, the lipid chains have fractured and the flavor profile is ruined.
Now look, the chemistry behind his warning is entirely sound. Continual exposure to fresh oxygen will absolutely accelerate lipid oxidation on the surface of the fat.
Right.
But I have to aggressively push back on the timeline here on behalf of anyone who actually cooks. I mean, who is keeping an unwrapped stick of butter in their fridge long enough for it to chemically degrade?
That's a fair point.
If I decide to make a batch of scrambled eggs or a grilled cheese sandwich, half the stick is instantly gone. The idea that a single stick of butter is lingering in a modern kitchen for weeks, slowly succumbing to atmospheric oxidation, it just vastly overestimates my personal dietary self-control.
From a practical standpoint, you are entirely correct. For the vast majority of home cooks, the butter is consumed well before the mechanical unwrapping process introduces enough oxygen to cause a perceptible culinary disaster.
Right, it's gone in 3 days.
True.
Mm-hmm.
However, understanding the volatility of the fat provides a critical lesson in proper food storage.
It really does. We have completely dismantled the basic visual assumptions of the dairy aisle today.
We track the lipophilic journey of beta-carotene from a blade of spring pasture grass through the violent mechanical concentration of the churning process.
We unpacked the psychological warfare and legislative absurdity of forcing companies to dye their fat bright pink.
Such a crazy story. And we explored how oxygen physically attacks the lipid chains we rely on for flavor. It's a remarkable chain of biology, economics, and chemistry determining the quality of a ubiquitous household staple.
Before we wrap up, I want to extract one final, highly actionable piece of advice from the research regarding that battle with oxygen.
Let's hear it.
If you want to preserve the structural integrity of your butter for as long as possible, you really need to rethink your refrigerator geography.
Oh, this is important.
Do not store your butter in that convenient little molded compartment on the door of the fridge. Every single time you open the refrigerator door, you are blasting that compartment with a wave of warm, ambient room air, causing microscopic temperature fluctuations that accelerate degradation.
Right. So where should it go?
Take your butter and push it all the way to the back of a central shelf inside the main body of the fridge, where the temperature remains the coldest and the most consistent.
It is a small adjustment that significantly extends the chemical lifespan of the fat.
Definitely.
And as you reorganize your fridge, I'd like to leave you with a broader concept to analyze on your own. We've spent this entire deep dive establishing how our perception of premium butter is intrinsically tied to a deep yellow color, a color that evolved as a natural biological byproduct of a cow grazing on fresh grass. But knowing how easily that visual standard was weaponized during the margarine wars, it begs a much larger question about the modern grocery store. What other natural food colors have we been socially and culturally conditioned to expect?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
And more importantly, how heavily are those rigid, consumer-driven visual expectations quietly dictating the way modern agricultural industries choose to feed, engineer, and process the animals we eat today?
That is a phenomenal question. It circles right back to the realization that we really aren't that different from someone who expects marinara sauce to always be red.
Exactly.
We demand the butter be yellow, we demand the salmon be perfectly pink, and we expect the egg yolks to be a vibrant orange. And when the natural biological reality doesn't match our strict visual expectations, human beings either panic or we actively engineer a way to fix it, even if that means passing a federal law to dye a perfectly edible block of fat neon pink. Keep questioning the chemistry of what is on your plate.